Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first edition of In Conversation, which could also be a peek behind the curtain, and also the Anthony Peak Consciousness Hour, all rolled into one. So this is the first one of 2026, and already I'm delighted to announce I already have 12 guests lined up for the whole year. In fact, people are backing up because so many people are wanting to be involved in this. So that's really, really good. And I'm particularly delighted today to have a returning guest, Professor Rob Gandy. Now, Rob and I've known Rob for around about two or 3 years, and Rob was a guest on this show about 2 years ago. And we had a fascinating discussion because Rob and I, when you meet many people in your life, and sometimes there are people you meet, you resonate straight away, and you get chatting and you get talking, and you find you have so many areas of overlap and interest that the conversation just goes on for hours because we've already been talking for 20 minutes before we've even started recording this because we have so many similar interests. And of course, as well, interestingly enough, Rob lives in what you call it, a village, a suburb called Spittal on the Wirral in Bebington, which is where I was born and brought up. And in fact, I lived in Spittal for around about 5 or 6 years, about 15 years ago. And Rob was living there then, and we never met each other. But I've known of Rob by reputation because of his excellent writing in 14 Times. And I've been fascinated by his articles and the way in which he digs deeply into the background and keeping the records of strange events that happen round, particularly round the north of England, but effectively as well, he spreads it even further. Because Rob, by background, is from Wolverhampton and a big Wolverhampton Wanderers supporter, and recently told me that he was also a season ticket holder. And an interesting statistic here, Rob's just mentioned to me that Rob's lovely wife, Margaret, that I met over Christmas, she's a Manchester City supporter. And those of you who are based in the UK will understand this, but probably wider from there, you probably won't necessarily understand. But there was the FA Cup third round last weekend. And Margaret supports Manchester City and Rob supports Wolverhampton Wanderers. And the two teams between them scored 16 goals. And as Rob was saying to me, so the chance of that ever happening again is just crazy because Manchester City won 10-1 as well. So congratulations to Rob for both of them, for their teams going through as well, which is excellent news. So without further ado, Rob, welcome to INCON.
Thank you very much, Tony. So what do you want me to talk about?
Right, okay. We discussed this last time a little bit, but I'd like to dig a little bit deeper before because Rob is working on a new book that will be published by Arcturus next year, I think. Will it be? Is that when it's scheduled?
Hopefully this year.
Oh, this year, even better. Oh, that's good. Yeah. And we'll talk about that book in due course as well, and the motivations and some of the cases that Rob will be talking about in that. But I'd like to know a little bit more about why somebody gets into this world of esoteric phenomenon. And you mentioned that you've been interested in ghosts since your childhood, and you have some family examples as well of ghostly hauntings.
I wouldn't necessarily say hauntings, but when you say about from childhood, I don't think there are any children, or many children certainly, who haven't heard about Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, whether it's from the Muppets' A Christmas Carol or actually reading the book. And I recall that when I was at primary school in the late 1950s, that ages me, my best friend Nicky Goff got hold of illustrated classics. It was a comic strip versions of classic books, which included Journey to the Centre of the Earth, amongst others. And
I remember them well. Them well.
And he got hold of the one for A Christmas Carol, and he showed it to me. And we went, "Oh, that's really good." But because it was on a cartoon strip with its speech bubbles and so on, we asked our teacher, can we do it as a bit of a play? And he was Scrooge and I was Bob Cratchit, and eventually half of the class were involved, being watched by the other half of the class, which, fair play to the teacher for seeing the opportunity for getting us children to act out and get familiar with the classics. And so yeah, from there, you tend to have an inkling about ghosts and so on. But also, at that era, I came across things like a magazine called Famous Monsters of Filmland, which is an American magazine, which I would buy from the shop at the bottom of Minan Street. And I always remember reading it. It was the first time I'd come across something that was American writing. And there's a word, COLOR, and I thought, what word is that? You know, it sounds like colour, but it can't be because it's not spelt correctly. Do you pronounce it color or something? And I don't know. And until my mum, spelt out that no, that's how Americans spell things. But also at that time, there was the like Aurora modelling kits where they had the famous monsters. So there was a Frankenstein, there was the creature from the Black Lagoon, as well as Bela Lugosi as Dracula and so on. So that permeated, and then you start to read books like Dracula and Frankenstein and so on. So it all kind of just evolved from there. And I've always had this inkling at the back that there's strangeness out there.
That's funny, that, because effectively, again, we're a similar age. I think you're slightly older than me, but not a great deal. And pardon?
You're 29, aren't you?
Last time I looked in the mirror, probably, or so I thought. But effectively, again, we seem to be, our generation, we are called the haunted generation in many ways because of the influences of television and everything. Yeah. And we all know in hauntology that is one of the terms that's used. But I remember very distinctly almost the same things. I remember both those two magazines. I remember the Aurora models very precisely, and really collecting those. And of course, you remember probably, and I know I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but the American Civil War cards that came out and Mars Attacks. Do you remember them? And how huge? And they made a movie about Mars Attacks afterwards. Yeah. And I still have, the way they talk about memory is attached to smells. I remember the smell of the chewing gum that used to go with the cards, and I can still smell it now. And you'll know that I used to live down on Bromborough Pool, and I used to walk to the shops on the Newchester Road on the A41 near Spittal. Yeah. There was a shop there called Meg's, and we used to buy them there, and we'd go back, and there were certain cards you always wanted, which was really, really different. But moving on then, so the other area that we both seem to have had an influence on, we seem to be running parallel lives almost, was the writings of John Keel, which I remember getting very heavily into. So can you explain a little bit what it was about John Keel that intrigued you so much in terms of his approach?
Well, it was almost by accident. I mean, I'd always had an interest in UFOs and such like, and read quite a few books. But then my wife, as a Christmas present, bought me a subscription to Flying Saucer Review, which I subscribed for a couple of years. And but with one of them, almost random choice, she got me a copy of Operation Trojan Horse by John Keel. And reading that, it put a completely different spin on what might be going on out there, and particularly his argument that there are ultra-terrestrials, which are interdimensional beings of whatever, who somehow know what we're doing and can manipulate reality and a whole range of things. And that culminated with the Mothman prophecies, which illustrated those sorts of things happening to him. I mean, obviously, he was a journalist. There's an element of, was he really telling the full facts accurately, so on? But trusting that what he was writing was genuine, certainly in the thrust of it, then I thought, wow, this is something to get your head around, or to struggle to get your head around, might be a better way of describing it.
Yeah, because that was it. It was because I, again, rather like yourself, I was really fascinated by the approach that John Keel took. I mean, I'd read books by Brad Steiger, and I think it was
Mm.
somebody Edwards, and there was a book called Flying Saucers Are Hostile. But they were
Yeah,
very much the mechanistic. They were UFOs. They were solid objects. They were coming from outer space, and they were potentially dangerous. Whereas John Keel took a totally different point of view. He
yeah,
brought in the folklore aspects and everything else as well, which of course was then developed by the great Jacques Vallée as well,
yeah.
in his
Passport to
position on
Magonia,
this,
yeah.
and Passport to Magonia. But it really was John Keel that really stimulated my interest in this,
Yeah.
because I know, having done now a number of events in the United States UFO based, in America there is still this approach to UFOs that they are tangible objects, whereas
Mm.
the European approach has always been that there's something stranger with regards to them. And I
Yeah.
very much feel that there's probably the answer is somewhere midway between the two in some way or other. But one of my associates, Brent Rains, does Mysterious America, his work, he actually knew John Keel as well, and quite a fascinating
Mm.
man in so many ways. And like you, that stimulated me. And then we have the third part of the triumvirate of overlap between the both of us is 40 and Time. Well, Flying Saucer Review, because I used to get that as well, but also 14 Times.
Yeah.
And you got into 14 Times at a very early stage, I think, in the.
Uh, well, yes, I mean, reading it and subscribing to it, I think it was around issue 34 or 35, way back in about 1981. So it was around about when my eldest son was born. So, and I've been with it, subscribing ever since. And I gradually got into writing for for it. Um, Sometimes almost by accident, and then you have ideas and you think, oh, that could be interesting, and you write it up and you send it off to David Sutton and hope that he might be prepared to read it and eventually publish it. And David's, really, really good, and we have an excellent relationship.
So how did that happen? Did you contact them and did you write an article, or how did
Yeah,
your contribution start?
well, it my first contribution to 14 Times was almost a forerunner of it happened to me, because it was a story of a personal experience, which I put down as being simply weird. Would you like me to describe it
I
to
would
you?
love you to describe it.
Okay, I'm going back to around about 1980. And I used to work at Fazakerley Hospital in the north of Liverpool, which you all know well. And I'd been to a meeting, and it was a Thursday or a Friday afternoon, and the meeting at Walton Hospital, the sister hospital to Fazakerley, was finishing at about 4 o'clock. And I decided that there was no point in driving all the way back to Fazakerley to then drive home. And so I set off down the road towards the centre of town, through my brain's gone, the area to the, well, it's between Everton's old ground, Goodison, and the new one, Kirkdale. And I was at the traffic lights, and they went on red, and I was about the third or fourth car back. And you know what it's like, people who should know better and should walk down to the crossing when the lights are on red and then cross over at the crossing. People don't do that. And what they do is, like a lady who was standing by the side of on the pavement, and she was, I describe it, my mum's old phrases, she was mutton dressed as lamb. She got bright, like dyed blonde hair, plenty of makeup, a loud blouse, and was carrying shopping bags. And for some reason, she decided that she was going to cross the road, and she went between the front of my car and the van in front that was immediately in front of me, and then looked up and down the road and crossed over. So as you sat there doing nothing, you watched this lady do that. And you think no more of it other than, gosh, that was a bit strange. Anyway, the lights changed to green. and we headed off. Went down to past Notre Dame, down Scotland Road, dual carriageway to the junction with Great Howard Street. So I'd gone about 3/4 of a mile, travelling at about 30 miles an hour, and the lights were on red. So I stopped and I pulled up, and I'm about the third or the fourth car back. And then to my left, immediately, there is this lady who has got loud dyed blonde hair, mutton dressed as lamb, loud blouse, carrying shopping bags, who steps off the pavement and goes between my car and the car in front and walks over to the central reservation. It was the same woman, exactly the same woman, and wasn't scary. It was just sort of like leaving me with my mouth wide open, thinking, what the hell is going on? And when the lights changed and I headed off, I was looking in my wing mirror and I could still see her. Now, either there were twin sisters in North Liverpool who'd gone shopping wearing exactly the same stuff and dressed exactly the same, and just happened to be coincidentally 3/4 of a mile apart.
Could she have got a bus or something?
No. It was about, what's 30 miles an hour, 3/4 of a mile, minutes, 2 minutes?
No, it's not possible, is it?
So I wrote that up for Fortune Times, and they headlined it as being it's only a very small article, as a time slip, which I don't know. So many different phenomena can have different labels, and yet the labels overlap. But yeah, that was one of the things that happened to me, and that's what started me writing. And then with a few others, and you just start to get into these things, and eventually things took off when it came to what I call the old man of Halsall Moss.
Yes, which I'm very interested in.
Yeah. Do you want me to go to where because it's where it all started in many ways.
Yeah.
And I was a big fan of Jan Brunvand, who wrote The Vanishing Hitchhiker. All about urban legends. And you can't but like urban legends because some of them are just so stupid. My favourite being the granny on the roof rack. I won't describe it now, but everybody, you can look that one up, and it's good fun, isn't it? And it was somebody's birthday when I was working at Fazakerley, and somebody's birthday. And in those days, we went to the pub to celebrate. It was Friday lunchtime, and I was saying, "Wow, there's this really good book. It's got all these fantastic stories, and it's about phantom hitchhikers." Yeah, and I described the classic phantom hitchhiker story. Young man driving. It's always a young man driving along in a car when he sees always a young woman standing at the side thumbing a lift, and he thinks, "Oh, in the middle of nowhere, this is not really good." And he stops and gives her a lift, and somehow she either points forward or gives him an address to Acacia Avenue. And then as he's about a few hundred yards from number 2 Acacia Avenue, he looks and she's disappeared. So he stops and he goes up to the front door and knocks on the door and says, I've just given a lift to a young lady, and describes her, and on sort of like Cemetery Lane or somewhere like that. And I was giving her a lift, and suddenly she's disappeared. But I thought I should come and tell you. And the old couple go, "Oh, you're the umpteenth young gentleman who's come and told us that story. You've given a lift to the ghost of our daughter who died on the very spot where you picked her up, killed 25 years ago to the day." or something like that. We have a laugh. But my friend and work colleague who was sat next to me said, "Well, actually, something like that happened to me." I said, "What?" And he then told me the story about, I'll call him Jim. He's a big bloke. And he said about he used to, going back to 1964, uh, when he was, I don't know whether he'd be in his late teens or early 20s, I was still living at home with his mum in Ormskirk, and he'd been for the night to Southport, which is separated by, for those who don't know, a flat area called Halsall Moss, with the main road between them. And he, it was late at night, and he was driving back, and it was dark, and he came to the bridge over the disused railway. And you know what you do when you're driving, you check your mirror every now and again, make sure everything's all right. And when he looks in the mirror, there sat in the back of his Mini was an old man. He could see that he got a bit of a cap, a scarf that was tied like a cravat, staring right back at him. And he said he looked at him long and hard. He wasn't hallucinating. There's this guy somehow in the back of his car. So he was really worried. Going back to the 60s, so you'll know what I'm talking about. So he stamps on the clutch and goes, "Oh, this car's playing up again," something like that. So he could stop the car. He got out and he reached for the crank handle, which he used to have for cars, to defend himself against whoever it was in the back. But there was nobody there. This really shook him up. And when he got home, he told his mum, and became part of family law. And a couple of years later, he and his mum went to a social gathering, a big social gathering. I think it was hosted by one of the local MPs at the time. And it was one of those events where the host makes sure that you don't sit next to the person you go with, because otherwise you're in danger of spending the whole night talking to the person you went with. And so to mix everybody up and get things happening, Jim and his mum were put on separate tables. And the table that his mum was on got around to the subject of ghosts. There's always going to be one that gets around to ghosts, isn't there? Mm. And she said, "Oh, and this is what happened to our Jim," and just told everybody the story that I've just relayed to you. And one of the other guys on the table said, "Oh, exactly the same thing happened to me at exactly the same place." So she called Jim over, and then he and this other guy had a talk for a while, and basically they'd experienced the same phenomenon at exactly the same place. Now, I took the view, which underpins everything, that if you don't write these things down and you don't put them out there, then they will just evaporate into the ether. There's lots and lots of family law where people have had things happen. If you almost have any family, I would get a bunch of friends, somebody will have a story of something that happened to one of them. But usually because of embarrassment and fear of ridicule, they don't broadcast these events. And so what I persuaded Jim to do, I said, if I don't write, this is a real Phantom Hitchhiker type event, whereas Jan Brunvan is saying this is an urban legend. So then you've got to not contradict, but you've got to get data. I'm a statistician by trade. People usually hold up a crucifix at that point. But if you don't get the information and the data, then how are you going to actually be able to analyze phenomena and try and get an inkling of what is going on? And hence, bless his cotton socks, he agreed as long as I anonymized him, which is what I did. And I sent it in to Fortune Times, and that appeared in, I think, issue 57, something like that. Anyway, that's where it sat. Now, I got into writing other bits and bobs, but round about 12 years ago, maybe 13 years ago, I realized that it was coming up to the 50th anniversary of the event, which had taken place in 1964, so 2014. And I'd always wondered, was this an isolated event, or was it something that there was, a lot more cases happening? And so I thought, well, how do you find out? You can't go around knocking on doors in the middle of Halsall Moss in these remote houses and farmyards and saying, excuse me, but have you had a strange experience? Well, you soon get arrested by the police. So I wrapped my brains and thought, well, how can I do it? And then they're less frequent now, but back in those days, it sounds terrible. I'm only talking about just a dozen years ago. And you used to have your freebie papers, where local stuff would be written, and paper versions, newspapers would be pushed through every door in an area. So I got in touch with the Champion newspaper, which I recently checked, and apparently it's now defunct because the internet's killed it. And so I got in touch with them, and they were very helpful. And they did. I did a piece which looked to tease out people who might have had experiences. I didn't want to put the full details of Jim's original story, because there's always the danger then you'll get people going, feed it back. So you give the bones enough to let people know something was going on, but to invite them to come in. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if I got a couple more? And I got 8 responses, and oh wow, that was really good. And then, and some of them, were pretty bizarre. Some of them were quite tame, but in fairness to everybody who was kind enough to respond, I recorded them all, and I wrote them up and put them into Fortean Times. And what followed then, in part, was that I was approached by Glenn Vaudrey, who does Weird Weekend North, and his first one, and he got in touch and said, could I come and speak about it at the first Weird Weekend North? So I said yes, and you get a free mug for doing it. But it's all good fun, that. But I also decided to do a presentation to effectively thank the people in the area. And I used to work in the health service, and besides being a statistician, I also did commissioning and planning and so on, which included at one point, at one point I dealt with cancer services specifically, and another I was the end of life commissioning lead for Liverpool Primary Care Trust for about 18 months. So I knew a lot of people in hospices, and I had a great affinity with some of them. And the lady who was the consultant over Queen's Court Hospice, just outside Southport, I knew her well. And so I said, what I'll do is I'll do a presentation for you to raise money for the hospice. So I did that. We got about 100 people. It was the place in Birkdale was rammed, much to my delight and surprise. And I gave the stories, went through all 8 of them and so on. But what surprised me was that afterwards, I had a queue of about half a dozen people with more stories. And in many ways, it's all started from there. In that they told the various stories, I wrote them up, and I'll describe briefly in a minute how I did them, how I approach these things. And then you go on there, you try to work out why these things have happened, what factors might have come into play, and I wondered whether the landscape was a factor. And then when I started looking, because in a flat area, you can lose perspective. Certainly if you've got mists and so on, and flat areas, particularly not that far from the sea, can engender mists. And that's when I came across the Ruskington horror, which was in the Fens, the flat area towards East Anglia in South Lincolnshire. And so the way that things have happened is that there's been this kind of a mixture of happenstance and cycles whereby you get a story, you do what I call a call for witnesses, then you get that and you write them up. But when you've written them up, then you find more people who've read it or have gone on the internet and found that call that you did 5 years ago and say, this happened to me. Gosh, I wonder if there's a ghost near Ruskington where that strange thing happened to me. And they Google it and they see that Rob Gandy was looking for that. And so then they get in touch with you. And it very much being that kind of evolutionary approach. I've never gone and tried to be completely comprehensive and try and do something across the whole of the UK. I wouldn't be so arrogant as to try and do that. I mean, there are other people writing about road ghosts, but I've been very happy to do what I do. I would say it's more of a folklore approach, possibly, because like back in the 19th century, you had various well-known folklorists would go out and speak to, the old people in their cottages and find the stories from them. In a way, I'm getting in touch with people and asking them what happened, what their experiences were, and getting to write down their testimonies and make them as comprehensive and in depth as possible. So there's an element of happenstance. I mean, when people know and trust that you will treat them seriously and treat them in confidence, then they'll open up to you. One advantage, which I guess, is having a PhD or being able to call yourself doctor. I mean, I'm not a medic. I mean, I didn't even do biology O level. I did art instead, and for my sins. But you wouldn't want me to treat you. But it means that when the people see that, I mean, newspapers, you give them the story, you stress that this, that, and the other, but then they go away and write what the hell they liked. So I've been described as a paranormal expert, and I'm not. I'm not in the slightest. But what I do is I collect stories of the testimonies of what have happened to people, and I try and make sense of them. And I've got over 200 testimonies, which I agree or have been agreed with the people concerned. So the approach is that I ask, when I come across somebody who's got a story and I get their permission. Some of them might have sent me an outline of what happened to them via an email, or I might have been talking to them. But I get what you need to know is, or what I always ask is, who was involved? Where did it happen? What were you doing there in the first place? How did things evolve? Who, where, what, when, why, etc. And the other W is weather. What was the weather was happening?
Right.
And one guy, a witness who I've become very, very good friends with. I mean, we found out we were both born on exactly the same day. Pure coincidence. But he joked that being the way I work is like being interrogated by the CIA. I'm not sure if that was a good thing or not, but I've never waterboarded anybody. I should listen to that. But when you pull together the information that people have sent you, I try and write it up on an as it happened basis, so that Mr. Bloggs was driving along the road and mist rolled in, and so that at the other end, the reader was almost like lived it, if I say it like that. And my greatest satisfaction is when I've got the final testimony agreed by the person, the witness at the other end, and they say it was like reliving it. That is my, that really makes me feel good about it. Even if you're thinking, oh God, they must have been terrified again, but it wasn't. That's how it goes.
Well, it's so important, isn't it? The way you write it up and the way you interface with the witness
Yeah,
is of profound importance. And I think there was so many interesting points you were making there, because I mean, this is folklore, this is urban legend, as it were. But the great Elliot O'Donnell, I remember many years ago, was collecting these stories, because if you don't write them down, they are lost forever.
yeah,
And as you say, they become part of a family tradition. But you can't, unless you're like somebody coming in, you can then link the things because you've got a broader perspective, and
yeah,
you're in the position where you can talk to other people, like the incident that happened twice with the old man in the back of the car. That you are the kind of the catalyst that's bringing this together. Now, I know there will be people out there that will be saying, oh yes, but the plural of anecdote is not evidence. And my counter argument to this is, well, no, it isn't. But it does mean that something significant is taking place. People may be misinterpreting these things in one way or another, but these events take place.
yeah.
And we can't just ignore them because we can't explain them scientifically, because that's not scientific, is it?
But with regards to science, science is always evolving, and it might be that there is an explanation behind all this. It's just that science hasn't expanded sufficiently to encompass it.
Yes. It's very much the point I make all the time. There's this arrogance, this hubris, that we can explain everything. Of course we cannot. 94% of the universe is missing, for God's sake. So to actually have this kind of arrogance and say that we can explain it, these events do take place. Now, are they hallucinations? And if they are hallucinations, we have no idea what hallucinations are. So there you have the counter issue, that hallucinations themselves cannot be explained. We cannot explain how the brain creates internal reality, how the brain creates a consciousness, how it creates a personality. So, and it's so important that people like you are out there collecting this information to stimulate people to think about them. Like your point, I think, was an excellent one about environment. Now, people like Paul Devereaux, who's written about this extensively, he will argue, that the environment is everything. It's as if, like the stone tapes theory, the idea is that there's some kind of resonation within the environment and it brings these things out. What are your opinions on that? With your experience of talking to people, do you have any ideas of what is taking place?
No.
Okay, it's interesting.
I mean, Alan Murdy, who is the chair of the Ghost Club, Alan is a really good guy. We get on well, and I write regularly for the Ghost Club journal. But he's a lawyer, and he says that the amount of evidence that is out there, really, in a legal perspective, it's a bit like, if you've got lots and lots of people who've all had the same experience, then it's accepted. There is a legal term that I don't know because I've never studied law, that therefore it is accepted as having happened because there are so many witnesses. I can't remember what the phrase is, but in a court of law, these disparate stories that we've been talking about, if we were prosecuting somebody, would be accepted as evidence. They can't just be dismissed in that sense. And I think what's important is to realize, my view is definitely that we are talking about phenomena, plural. We're not necessarily just talking about a phenomenon, whereas most people think with ghosts that they are the spirits of the dead. Was it the Akashic records that are supposed to exist somewhere where everybody's life story is there? Well, we get lots of, in this world, there's lots of identity theft. So there's nothing to say that there aren't entities that are, this is pure speculation, but that there are entities that can access these life stories and pretend to be the deceased person. And the thing is, you can't ever prove any of this.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that, long after I've gone, I don't think there will ever be an answer. Maybe we're not supposed to know.
Yeah, because this is the argument people use all the time, isn't it? That, where are the academic papers? Well, have been academic papers written on these subjects, but also the counter argument to say, that where is the tangible evidence? Where is the proof? Now, I would argue that somebody like yourself, who's going out and interviewing the individuals in question, you're fairly good, I'm sure, at gauging whether somebody is pulling your leg. You will know from their reaction, from whether they show fear, that something genuinely occurred. They experienced something.
Yeah, most of my communications are not necessarily in person.
Okay.
They are via telephone calls, but also a lot of it is via the internet. Emails to and fro. But when I start to do the first draft, when I will test something almost to destruction in terms of does it make sense? It might be a weird story, but it's got to make sense within its own right. And so you're looking at you'll always come up with questions, simple questions like, did you have the radio on in your car? And so on. What was the weather like? But when you ask these questions, you get answers straight back. Now, if somebody was trying to spin you a yarn, you would probably find that they would give you too much information maybe at the beginning. But there's an element, shall I say, with this of like chasing the dragon. And the best example that I've got is that in that you get a story, but then you follow up on it. And there was one story outside Lincoln whereby a lady had gone for lunch with her mum to a village, and on the way back, I think it's to the west of Lincoln, she'd gone and turned right at this junction and gone down the road. And then there was this strange misty thing which almost seemed to be about 12 foot up in the sky, which came across, but it was almost as if it was, had some intelligence, because it like stopped as their car approached and almost like studied them and then went on. And they both said, "What was that?" And not a very exciting story, and she hadn't really told me anything about exactly where they were and so on. Just saw like where they were starting and everything. So I gently pressed her about, can you give me more details and so on. And the road that she was on was a road called Tom Otter's Lane. Now, that's a strange name for a road. So you start Googling away and thinking, why would you have a road named after somebody called Tom Otter? And then you find that he was a bit of a scoundrel. No, he was a lot of a scoundrel, because he was a bigamist who'd then gone and married his second wife, who was well pregnant, had a lunch in I think it was a Sun Inn in Saxelby, and then went walking along the lanes, don't know where he basically clubbed her to death.
God.
Yeah. Right. So, right, okay, nasty piece of work. So he was, the body was found, and people were aware of the link. And so he was found and caught and tried and hung. But as what they do with things in those days, they gibbeted him. And they gibbet somebody and hang them from a cage about 12 foot or whatever in the air, so that people can't actually reach it. And It's weird, but apparently when he was gibbeted, there were lots of people, a bit like a country fair, sitting, the body's hanging up there, and everybody's having a carnival downstairs, particularly with a lot of gypsies. And apparently gypsies were prone to camping out close to gibbets because then people would keep away for superstitious reasons. So I thought, oh, well, I wonder where the gibbet was. And you can guess where it was. It was exactly where those women were driving to, where this cloud or something blew across at 12 foot high, which was about exactly the height of the gibbet.
That's validation, isn't it? Effectively.
Well, yeah, but that was because my curiosity had run. I say your follow-up thing. That's what I call when I say chasing the dragon. Sometimes when you get these stories, you have to, just like think a bit laterally on them and see if there's anything further. But that was another story. But because when you put things, I've been interviewed by radio stations, like on when I was doing the stuff in Lincolnshire, and pieces go on the internet, and you then, it's a bit like dropping a stone in a pond. You're looking for things that happened around, in this case, Ruskington, but then it gets picked up by somebody in Scunthorpe, who then gets in touch and says, "Oh, hello, this is what happened to me," and you just run from there, and then you get a couple of stories from Scunthorpe, and so you do something in Scunthorpe, and then you get even more stories. But one of the things from Scunthorpe, which I thought was important, was that there was one lady who lived not far from the main viaduct over Scotter Road, who had said that she, when she was young, was always warned by her parents that not to be in the woods when it was getting dark because there were ghosts of two children around there. So you looked into it, and there were two children who were murdered by the father in the area, in that particular area. Around, I think, in the 1920s or something like that. But if you stand back from it, and this is where you've always got to think, well, it might not be a supernatural thing. A lot of parents will tell their children ghost stories in order to get them to come in by a proper time. And particularly when the nights are drawing in, they don't want the kids to be out too late. And so one of the things that they will do, particularly if there's been something that their parents were aware of, even maybe from their parents, about kids being murdered, what better than to suggest that there might be ghosts and so on. So I think there is this element of ghost stories being told as warnings to be able to manage kids. And then, of course, if those kids believe the story, then they'll pass it on to their kids and so on and so forth. So you don't know how many, such long-standing stories about this place is haunted. Might be actually, the origin might be some parents trying to scare their kids into not staying out late.
Yeah, it's applying Occam's razor, isn't it? And it's perfectly fair. What is the more reasonable explanation? Are the dead children that are manifesting, or is it something different? But in terms of the children manifesting here, it's quite interesting because
on that, I must say that as far as I'm aware, nobody's seen those children's ghosts.
But you do have another story, don't you, that you collected about ghost children?
Yes, there are a number, which I haven't got to hand, but there was, in the current issue of 14 Times, a collection of curious occurrences. Yes, There was the witness and his family lived in a particular house where there seemed to be 3 or 4 ghost children who would appear to their children and sometimes play with those children. And there are examples of that when their kids were out, they could hear somebody playing up in the bedroom, and they would creep up and they could hear right up to the bedroom door, and they could hear somebody or something playing in the bedroom. But as soon as they opened the door, it all went quiet.
When I read that, because by the way, everybody, if you do get the opportunity, Rob has got a fascinating article in the latest edition of 14 Times citing a number of these occurrences. Because particularly when I was reading that, I was reminded of a previous guest of this show, the late, great Paul Eno. And Paul Eno was a similar guy to yourself, but he was researching over in New England, in Rhode Island. And one of the cases that always sends a shiver up my spine, and he witnessed this, was there was a haunting in a house where children were heard. And him and his fellow investigators went into the house, and they went into the area underneath the house, and they saw shimmering in the darkness images of 2 children.
Right.
But what is interesting about this is what I find extraordinary about this case. And again, if anybody's interested, just go back on my YouTube channel to go back to the interview with Paul Eno where he explains this. But the children could see them. The children reacted to the witnesses.
Right.
They could see them. And it was as if the witnesses were actually ghosts to the children.
Yeah.
And as if this kind of weird time slip. Now, if you believe in the block time theories of people like Herman Minkowski, who was Einstein's teacher, block time, all time is now. It's a block, and we move through it, but everything is concurrent. So there can be overlaps here. But one of the things, again, we discussed, it's amazing how quickly time goes when us two get chatting. But there are 1 or 2 stories you sent me that I found particularly intriguing, and maybe we'd like to touch on 1 or 2 of them now. And I was particularly interested in the ghost of the monk that was 12 foot high. Can you explain this? Because this is just mad. This is just crazy.
It's the only time I've ever been on television. When I was interviewed by Neil Oliver on GB News, but whoever was doing the the words in front of him must have got me a spelling mistake, because he kept calling me Dr. Gundy rather than Gandy. But hey, this was I actually kind of referred to it 5 minutes ago when I said that when I was seeking witnesses for the Ruskington horror, I got contacted by a lady from Scunthorpe, and it was actually this story that she was telling me. And if I may, I will read it rather than try and describe it, because with my black country accent, I'll probably become unintelligible, certainly to our friends across the pond. So, right. In 1999, 20-year-old Katie was living at her home in Scunthorpe. Her bedroom window looked across Bristol Road to the main Scotter Road, which runs parallel, separated by a long island of grass with trees and bushes. This stretch of Scotter Road is between the railway viaduct and West Common Lane. Late one summer night, when it was dark and raining heavily, her mother, Catherine, popped into her bedroom to have a chat with her. Katie went to shut the curtains, but she caught sight of something on Scotter Road that made her stop what she was doing. She said to her mum, "Look at that idiot out there in the rain. It looks like he's on stilts. There must be a fancy dress party going on somewhere." Her mum came across and looked out of the window, and together they watched what looked like a monk coming from their right. He was confidently and steadily striding along the flatter part of the grass verge, on the far side of the island between the line of the trees and Scotter Road. He could be seen heading south towards West Common Lane as he was illuminated by two street lamps which, along with the trees, are spread apart. His habit was brown and definitely not black, and his hands were in front of his body as though they were up inside the sleeves of the opposite arms. The hood stood up to a point, which was surprising given the heavy rain, but they couldn't see his face because of the angle. However, what really flummoxed Katie and her mum was that the monk appeared to be 12 to 15 feet tall. They looked on in awe at the oddness of what they were both seeing. The monk was walking so well that they assumed that he must be using stilts. Neither said anything initially as they tried to make sense of what was unfolding before them. After about 2 or 3 minutes, a bit bored I think, Katie turned away first, trying to dismiss it as someone in a weird fancy dress. Catherine continued to watch and said that she saw it walk past a large bush, almost as if it was going into it. It then didn't come out the other side, completely disappearing. The next day, Katie and Catherine reflected on how weird what they had witnessed had been, and that it could not have been someone in fancy dress. They compared notes and agreed on all points relating to the height, the colour of the habit, the pointed hood, the gait, the heavy rain, the clarity of vision, and the very strange numbness that they both experienced at the time, which is worth noting. Katie went to the trees and took measurements, with Catherine looking on from Katie's bedroom window. It shocked them that these confirmed that the monk was certainly no smaller than 12 feet tall. In addition, using stilts would have been nigh on impossible in heavy rain because they would have undoubtedly sunk into the grass verge, and there were no related holes. Over the years, Katie has repeatedly said to her mum, "What we saw was weird. Why didn't I get a coat on and go over to the road to it?" But Catherine always says that you don't think of that at the time. Your mind cannot make sense of the situation, so you just want to ignore it. In their case, they were transfixed as a monk-like figure walked past until it was out of sight.
That is so extraordinary in so many ways, isn't it? It makes no rational sense.
No.
And that's why you believe people like this, because they could embroider it and make it more sensible. Why would they make it so ridiculous?
Yeah, but what is interesting is that a few years after that, I got contacted by a guy who had been driving down Scotter Road, but further up but in the same direction, and he saw walking along the side of the road, heading in the same direction, so he was coming from behind, what he thought was somebody on stilts, a bit dressed like a clown. It was about 10, 12 foot tall.
Good Lord.
Different outfit. Wasn't a monk, but it was stuff that got like striped trousers and a bit of a cloak type thing. Yeah.
You can imagine if somebody, a skeptic, would turn around and say, "Oh, there's just some local kids having fun going up and down the road in stilts." Well, why would be the point. The first point would be, and second point, years difference. So the only thing you can think of is that it's the same location and the same modus operandi. So is there a particular trick of the light that takes place there, or the trees at the side? Is it a form of pareidolia? It's intriguing, isn't it?
Well, the two things that were seen were dressed completely differently. But I think what was very important was that with it having rained and it being wet, when Katie went out the next day, there was no trace of any indentations in the grass.
Yeah, which I thought was a profoundly important point.
If there were stilts involved.
Yes. So you have to say that the indentations would be there. The people doing the joking wouldn't go to the extent of actually disguising and filling in the holes. So you have to jump to the conclusion that something really strange. It almost reminds me in many ways of, DMT entities, the kind of the jokey cosmic spirits that seem to there to pull our legs in some way, or like Pennywise in
I think the
Stephen.
trickster's got a lot to answer for you.
Yeah, it does seem to be, doesn't it? It seems that it's kind of almost a joke, that somebody's pulling your leg. The entities I call the egregorials are pulling our leg in some way because they have this profound sense of humour. And they are just doing it for being silly sake. And to say to the human beings, oh, let's go down there and scare a few human beings. I remember many years ago, again, going back to the early 1960s, I remember a particular edition of the Fantastic Four, which came out about 1965, and the title was Enfant Terrible. My French accent is terrible. But it was the idea of this alien that comes down and it's manipulating the planet and it's doing all these incredible things and it's making silly things happen. And then the punchline of the story is that it's a child. It's an alien child who's playing. And that's why everything is so ridiculous. And that stuck in my mind. So when I then came across the work of John Keel and Jacques Vallée, and then subsequently with DMT entities, which I've written about extensively, you then get this feeling of a joke happening in some way or other. And we're not quite getting it, or we're the butt of it in some way. But now moving on, I'm aware of our time scales now. But now, Rob, can you tell us about the new book? Have you got a title? And can you tell us more about it?
The working title is Real Ghost Stories, which I don't think it'll end up being that because it doesn't really distinguish it from a lot of other ghost books. So we'll have to think of something a bit more imaginative. I've been working with Arcturus, and I've done my initial draft chapter to try and lay the foundations, which we agreed with the editor that it would be on the Ruskington Horror for fairly obvious reasons. But I've actually gone and been drafting the other chapters as well while I'm waiting for the editor to come back, rather than let the grass grow under my feet, because obviously we want to try and get it sorted. There was this talk about trying to get a version ready for next month, February. Obviously, I'm partly in the hands of the editor, but as long as I'm keeping my end up, that's all that I can do at this stage. So I'm with about 9 chapters. If you just want to hang on, where are we? I can. I'm not blocking the. No, that's right. Okay. I'm starting off with a chapter about phantom jaywalkers and hitchhikers, and then going into, I call them uneasy riders, which basically is ones about motorbikes or even bicycles, before then going to spectral hotspots, which is Ruskington and other places, haunted places, which is a bit softer, and then haunted people, where I've got people who have had a whole series of experiences who don't claim to be psychic, but these things, strange things just keep happening to them. Phantom vehicles, and I've got one about time slips. Needless to say, that will feature Liverpool's Bold Street, amongst other things. Then I think Astounding Apparitions is one that we've got, which is a bit of a miscellany of where people just come across the strangest things. And one of them is the other story that I sent to you about the little girl in the night dress, where these things that just happen, but you can't explain them. They're just off the charts, really. And then we'll finish off with Unnerving Encounters, which cover a range of things like faceless phantoms, things that when you look at them, they don't have a face. Plus the getting back to Merseyside, the Aintree Spectres, which I did an article for 14 Times about, where you've got people running around a field not far from the famous racecourse over the years, dressed in what looked like Ku Klux Klan outfits, brandishing torches. Yeah. And there'll be an introduction and there'll be a conclusion, although I'm not sure what the conclusions can be.
And have you haven't decided on the cover yet? I guess
No. Okay. It's still too early in those days. But as I say, I'm concentrating on getting the chapters drafted. They'll obviously change, but you've got to, rather than sitting back and waiting for John to come and tell me this, that, and the other, it's easier to just go and then change something.
Absolutely. As we discussed a few days ago, when we were chatting, one of the issues, the challenges you're going to have is, you can put the chapters in any order, and it's for impact, and that's the creative thing, isn't it, to build up the expectations or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, one thing that Arcturus are particularly keen to emphasize and for me to address is the fact that these phenomena take place across the world.
Yes.
Where I've done my research is naturally are local. Well, I say local, I mean UK primarily. I have got the power of the internet is you get a call for witnesses to something happening in Eastham on the Wirral, and you get a response from somebody in South Africa. Nothing to do with Eastham on the Wirral, but about a haunted Admiralty building out there, which so what I've done with coming back to David Sutton of 14 Times, there was, or there are, the bookazines about It Happened to Me. There's about half a dozen of them where people over the years have written in and told their stories. And these are from people from all over the world. And what David was happy for me to do was for me to, I've got the set, so is to go through them and identify similar types of stories to what I'm writing about.
Excellent.
That are in there, i.e. they are real life, it happened to me type experiences. And then I've taken them and I've rewritten them in my style.
Very good.
Whilst also giving credit to the fact that this was written on, this is in It Happened to Me 14 Times, issue 4, page 51.
That is excellent. I love 14 Times, but particularly It Happened to Me, because over the years there's been so many incidents on there that reflects my own writing as my own models of reality. So that's really, really good. So I always go to the back and read that section first, which is really good. Anyway, Rob, thank you very much as always. Fantastic talking to you. It's always really good. I'm buzzing around with ideas afterwards. Yeah. So I will let's stay in contact and let me know about if there's any changes with the book and everything else as well, because I can update in the conversations. So what we'll do is this will be recorded and it will be uploaded the second Sunday next month. So it will be uploaded in February as the second show, but I'll let you know in advance and everything else.
No, thank you for that. Right. Well, thank you for inviting me, and I hope I've covered all the things that you wanted me to cover.
Absolutely, and more. But we'll have you back. I mean, because there's still so much more to talk about, because there is. Okay, Rob, all the best, and regards to Margaret and everything else as well.
Take care.
See you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.